If I told Mets fans this morning that Darin Ruf and Mychal Givens would be the two players that this team added at the deadline, I know you'd be disappointed. But on this bonus edition of Locked On Mets, I'm going to explain why this roster is in good shape. And I'm also going to rejoice because guess what, folks? JD Davis, no longer a Met.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on Twitter at FinkelsteinRyan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. Now, the Darren Ruff trade is one that I don't believe will be popular with Mets fans, just like the Daniel Vogelbach trade was not popular among Mets fans, but the Mets are undefeated since Vogelbach came into the lineup, and Darin Ruf is a perfect complement to Vogelbach. Now, the reason why fans aren't happy from what I'm gauging on Twitter is because the return that got sent out seems steep. I'm going to get to the return in the next segment. JD Davis and 3 pitching prospects. And Davis being gone, Mets fans who've been listening to the show know that was just music to my ears. I was happy as soon as I saw that. And then when they got Darin Ruf back, I'm like, all right, good trade. Didn't even dive into the pitching prospects on first glance because that was just the 2 parts of this deal that popped out to me. And that's where I want to start here. And that's basically the reason why I still think that ultimately this deadline was enough of a success for the Mets to hold on to this division lead and to have a good shot when they get into the postseason. And you go through the deadline and you hang on to all your top prospects, which I know there's fans that want them to put all the chips into the center of the table. But look, Wilson Contreras wasn't moved. JD Martinez wasn't moved. The asking price on those guys was maybe so astronomical that the Mets decided not to go there. And maybe those teams think that a qualifying offer to Contreras or to Martinez is going to be more valuable getting a comp pick back than whatever they were trying to acquire at the deadline. So you look at the move and it's getting Darin Ruf. And again, we'll talk about the return in the next segment, but he's the perfect complement to Vogelbach. He spent 3 years in Korea after being a Philly in the early stages of career, goes and plays in the KBO from 2017 through 2019, is signed by the Giants on a minor league deal in 2020, and then ends up sticking around. In 3 years with the Giants, he's hit 248, 358 on base, 455 slugging, 32 home runs, 99 RBIs, a 123 OPS plus, in 726 plate appearances. So that's just over what, a full season would be, right? If he was playing every single day. And 32 bombs is nothing to sneeze at. But what makes this guy the perfect fit on this roster is he's a top 10 hitter in baseball since he came back stateside when it comes to facing left-handed pitching. That is how good he has been at that specialized skill. And I'm going to explain why right now. Since coming back, a 266 hitter against lefties, 380 on base, 557 slugging. His 22 home runs are tied for the 9th most among any hitters against left-handed pitching during that span, and he has a 155 WRC plus against lefties. Now, again, WRC plus is weighted runs created plus, measuring hitters based on a league average of 100. So he's been 55% better than your league average hitter against lefties. That's the 9th best mark among hitters with at least 200 plate appearances. So again, I tell you, he has been a top 10 lefty-masher in Major League Baseball since 2020. He's on the books for $3 million this season and next season. And you have a $3.5 million club option on him in 2024 with a cheap buyout. So you have control here as well, similar to the Vogelbach trade. Essentially, the Mets have taken 2 pieces on their roster in J.D. Davis and Dom Smith, and they have turned them over, and they now have Vogelbach and Darin Ruf that can fill those roles. Now, Dom remained on this team. And I imagine that when he gets healthy, he's likely going to be stashed in AAA, and he provides you some insurance for a Vogelbach injury, a Naquin injury, or a Pete Alonso injury. That's probably going to be his role this season. I don't know if we see Dom again now that they've made these moves. You look at what Ruff has done this season against lefties. It's a 252 average, 364 on base, 523 slugging, 9 home runs, and a 151 WRC plus. If you remember, I believe that might be the exact mark, or maybe it was a 149 WRC plus that Vogelbach had against right-handed pitching. So now you're talking about in the middle of your lineup, a DH platoon that if you combine their numbers, you're talking a 150 WRC plus and over 20 home runs. That's exactly what you needed from that spot in your lineup. As great as Josh Bell is, right? He doesn't have numbers that good this season, going from both sides. And what it would have taken potentially to acquire him might have been more significant. We don't know because he ends up in the Juan Soto trade. But the point is, while you can quibble on all the prospects the Mets sent out, what I'm going to explain in the next segment as we go through the return here is that Billy Epler did not give up any prospects of significance that are franchise altering. He held on to Mark Vientos and Ronnie Mauricio, guys that were probably on the bubble to be traded. He obviously kept Beatty and Alvarez off the table entirely. They held on to Alex Ramirez and Matt Allen and Calvin Ziegler and Dominic Hamill and Jose Budo. And so these are prospects that the next time you have to swing a trade, whether it's the offseason or next year's deadline, you have more capital. And I think what you saw at this trade deadline ultimately is the juice wasn't really worth the squeeze for a lot of these guys. That's why Contreras didn't move. That's why Martinez didn't move. And some of these bullpen arms didn't even move. Like Gregory Soto doesn't end up going anywhere. Did they even trade Andrew Chafin in Detroit? That's a name that I don't think I saw come across my timeline here. Yeah, they held on to Chafin. They held on to Joe Jimenez. They held on to Soto. They traded Michael Fulmer, and you can quibble about not getting David Robertson, but the Mets get Mychal Givens, and that's a solid addition. And apparently, just for a low-level minor leaguer, we don't even know the return on that just yet. So ultimately, the Mets address their needs. They get a right-handed complement at DH. They get a bullpen arm. Now there's a lot more pressure on Trevor May and Tyler McGill to perform in that bullpen. But for what was available to them, for what they ultimately send out, I think this was a fine deadline for the Mets. The combination of Vogelbach, Naquin, Ruff, and Givens is enough to put this Mets team in position to win this division. I want to talk about the return, though, a little bit in a second here for Ruff, and also getting Mychal Givens. Before we do get to that, though, BetOnline.net is your number one source for all your betting needs and sports info. Find out the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news. BetOnline is your continued source for all of your sports wagering information, including live betting, esports, and scores. BetOnline.net is the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite sports and events, including MMA, boxing, and golf. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in the action. BetOnline, where the game starts. Now, in this trade to the Giants, the Mets send J.D. Davis. Bye, J.D. I'll miss ya. No, I won't. Oh, man, J.D. Davis is gone. Hasn't sunk in yet. I don't know what is greater for me. The fact that Max Scherzer's a Met and that one hasn't sunk in, or that J.D. Davis isn't, which obviously I'm kidding. But, man, those at-bats were bad. Did you see Patrick Corbin blow away J.D. Davis last night? I believe that was his final at-bat. You're there to face a guy you've raked against in your career, and he just gears up and throws fastballs by this guy to set him down. It was great when they went to the pen. They didn't have another lefty in that bullpen. So the Mets go to Vogelbach, and it's just sayonara J.D. Davis now as he has moved in this deal. I honestly think, and I'm kind of joking, kind of serious, that the reason the Mets had to give up so much prospect capital is for the Giants to take on J.D. Davis. I don't think he had any value. So I look at him in this trade and you say, oh my God, they gave up J.D. and 3 pitching prospects. I take that out, okay? I'd say they gave up 3 pitching prospects for Ruff, and the Giants were kind enough to take J.D. Davis off your roster because he probably would have been either optioned to the minors or DFA'd anyway. I'm sure they see some value in J.D. I'm sure as a rebuilding team now, or a team that's caught in the middle for the final half of this season, they figure they'll try to develop him. They'll try to show them with their technology some holes in his swing. And if he does unlock something in San Francisco, that's a credit to the Giants. That was never happening with the Mets. So to me, that's a non-issue in this trade. Now, you give up 3 pitching prospects, and 2 of them pretty promising. I guess all 3 are promising. Thomas Sabucky is a guy that we've seen before. I'm not too high on him anymore. He has had good numbers in AAA this year, 3.38 ERA. He's striking out 12.2 batters per 9. That's solid, but the walks are still high. We've seen him at the big leagues for a couple of appearances that haven't gone well. That does not mean that he has gotten a fair amount of run at the majors. This is still a pitcher that could find success in San Francisco. I think eventually as a left-handed reliever more than him being a starter, but he is a piece that's close to big league ready, if not already big league ready. The Giants get back. That's really the most significant prospect, in my opinion, even though these other two guys are more, high upside considering where they're at in their careers. But you got a 23-year-old in Carson Seymour, who was the 6th-round pick for the Mets in 2021. Good numbers this year, 2.76 ERA combined between low A and high A. In Brooklyn, up in high A, 3.68 ERA across 81 and 2/3 innings pitched, 11.4 strikeouts per nine. That's really good. But he's a 23-year-old in high A still. We'll see what he looks like as he continues to climb through the minors. I don't think it is the end of the world to give up an arm like that in this deal. The other arm is Nick Zwack, 17th round pick in 2021. Really good numbers for him as well. 1.84 ERA in high A, 10.2 strikeouts per nine. Michael Mayer is great with prospects. He obviously runs Mets Mirage over there and Mets Minors. And he had both of these guys in the Mets top 30. I trust his eye on Mets prospects more than MLB.com. So that does show you this was significant to lose those two arms. And Zappucki isn't nothing either. But MLB.com didn't have any of them in the Mets top 30. So it just depends on how you look at it, which outlet you go to. And this was a return that I think was probably more than I would have necessarily wanted to see the Mets give up. At the same time, I have no qualms about it to get a guy in Darin Ruf that complements the Mets' needs. As much as I've talked up Mark Vientos and still think he has a chance to be a really good bat as soon as this season, I think that Darin Ruf has so much of a higher floor, and considering the team's goals this year, I don't know if you could have just gone out and said, you know what, we don't like the price on any of these guys, so we're going to run it out there with Vientos. You get a guy here in Ruf that makes a lot of sense. What you gave up, like I said, none of these guys are franchise-altering prospect, and there's a chance that none of them ever have big league success. There's also a chance the Giants develop one or two of them, and you look back and it's a terrible trade. But right now, today, it's not a terrible trade. That only happens depending on how those guys progress through the minor leagues. And still, I think that what they've done here with Ruff and Vogelbach is manufacture a DH platoon that could be the difference in the Mets winning the division this year. That's how high I am on that combination coming together here at DH. Mychal Givens is underwhelming to me because you saw David Robertson go for a prospect that was ranked a little bit low in the Phillies farm system, but has a lot of strikeouts and is having success as a starting pitcher in high A. So maybe that's just an arm that the Phillies really, or that the Cubs really valued over anything the Mets could have provided. Obviously, Robertson would have been a better addition than Givens, but he has a 2.66 ERA. Givens does this year with 51 strikeouts and 40 and 2/3 innings pitched, 11.3 strikeouts per nine, which is in line with his 10.6 career mark. This has been a good relief pitcher for a really long time. Seems like he gets traded every single deadline. He spent the first 6 seasons of his career in Baltimore, 5 of them playing under Buck Showalter. So there's obviously trust there. A 94-mile-per-hour fastball with a good slider and a solid changeup. Both of those off-speed offerings, batters are hitting less than 200 against him this year. And it's good against lefties and righties. So I think overall, solid addition. On the show tomorrow, when I'm kind of looking at the roster as a whole, I'll go through what the Mets bullpen will kind of shape up to be in the second half of the season here, with Trevor May coming back, with Tyler McGill potentially slating in here. But overall, kind of a mediocre trade deadline for the Mets, yet I think they address most of their needs. And with Jacob deGrom returning to the hill right now, literally as I'm recording at 7:07, about to watch the game, the Mets are a team that you should still be excited about in the second half here. But that's going to be all for this bonus edition of Locked On Mets. Again, on the show for tomorrow, a full breakdown of not only this, but what else happened in this division at the deadline. I'll recap Jacob deGrom's return and, look at where the roster stands post deadline. As always, thank you for listening. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. Make sure you follow me on Twitter at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen every day. After your second listen, check out Locked On MLB. Sully's got you covered with everything that just happened at the deadline. You can follow Locked On MLB wherever you get podcasts.